doing? My name's Dave, and if you've been setting up cameras all day to do this video, you can call me Daveypoo, the mobile music minstrel. How you doing? Hey, look at this! I have an actual instrument in my hand. Hey, and no disrespect, the iPad is an instrument too, but you know what I'm talking about. Today I'm finally gonna do one of these bass videos that I've been talking about for so long, because I finally got the setup to be able to do it all. So, thanks for joining me. I'm going to answer some questions about this bass, and we're going to talk about being able to get a number of different tones from a single instrument. I don't like to carry a lot when I go out to the gig. Be that doing a studio session, which, you know, a lot of times it's just going over to some guy's house, but I don't want to carry a lot. I don't want to go to a bar or a party or some event that I'm supposed to play at, and I don't want to have to carry a whole lot. But I also want to be able to have variety in the music that I play. I really am a big believer in making sure that each song has its own personality, meaning that it has its own vibe, it has its own groove, that you don't use all the same tricks for every song, right? You gotta shake it up. Each song has to have its own personality. That goes for making a record. You know, I don't want to do the same things in every single song. To me, that bores me, and when I listen back to my own stuff, I hear the tricks that I've done. I would much rather shake it up. So, the whole point is to be able to do different things in a single sitting. Now, I don't want to have to bring 10 different basses with me. I don't want to have to be fiddling with knobs on the amp. I don't want to have to be messing with pedals on the floor. I want to be able to do it all from this instrument. So, I have designed this instrument to be able to do it the way I would like it. So here, let's talk about it, since I've gotten a lot of questions about it in the past. It is a Fender Precision bass. It was made in Japan. For the upper camera, you can see it there. It was made in Japan, and it's an E series because the serial number is E blah 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 blah. So a lot of times they'll refer to these as the E-series basses from Japan. And they were made somewhere from like 1984, 85 to 87, something like that. This particular one is sort of mid-80s, mid to late 80s. I bought this bass. It was hanging on a wall in a rehearsal studio in Beacon Falls, Connecticut. When I was rehearsing there and I kept seeing it, it was like 175 bucks. And so, even though I was in college, I thought I can come up with 175 bucks. So I talked to the guy who ran the rehearsal studio. He was also a guitar luthier and repair guy. And I gave him 175 bucks, and I bought this P bass. For the longest time, this just knocked around the house. I loved the way it played, but I didn't like the way it sounded. And I had a Fender jazz bass that I used, that was my weapon of choice for many, many, many years. So I used that forever, and then I was watching videos on YouTube. Let's go back to the genesis of the story. There's a video, and I'll make sure that I link it below, to this guy, Mike Masuda, and he pimped out his P bass. He picked up a P bass online, the one he wanted. He picked it up used somewhere, and he just totally pimped it out the way he wanted to do it. He bought like a vintage pickup, and he slapped it in there, and he did all these cool things, and it really inspired me. Like, I never thought to pimp out the P bass prior to that. I had done a lot of modifications on my jazz bass, but it never occurred to me to do it on the Precision bass because I never liked the way it sounded, and this was like, well, duh, if you like the way it plays, make it sound the way you want it to sound. So, here are some of the things that I have done to this bass. Now, I tried to keep this as Fender as possible, even though I was modding it, and that's going to sound weird, but it'll make sense in just a second. So the first thing was changing the pickups. This bass didn't originally have two separate pickups. It only had this one pickup, which is typical of this style of bass guitar, which is a Fender Precision bass guitar. Typically only had this one pickup. It's split, okay? That way it doesn't cause hum, which is a standard feature of a single magnetic coil in a guitar pickup. Typically hums because it 60 cycle a second hum. It's just inherent in magnetic pickup design. But this way they split up they put two coils and they wind them the opposite way, and then it phases each other out, and then you don't get the hum, so it's called a humbucker. Look at that. So you got a split humbucker, that's standard, and then I cut into the bass and I added this one. I had a shop do it. Let's just listen to the tone of the bass by itself. I'm going to have all things wide open, and I use bright strings on this bass. Now, again, I want to try to get a number of different tones, so by default, this bass is very bright. Okay, I can get a real nice... I can get it to grind and slap and bite when I really want it to bite. I can slap it. And it's real nice and bright and snappy, okay? That's because of the bright strings that I use. That's both pickups wide open. It's totally fine. Maybe a little rockier because of the bite, but it's just kind of a nice, full, all-around, decent sound. Originally, if I didn't have both of these pickups, if I just had the one, I'm going to turn off this. So I added this knob here is now stacked. So you've got the top part is the front pickup, the bottom part is the back pickup, because I didn't want it. A lot of guys will turn this jack into a third knob and then they'll drill into the side of the bass. I wanted to leave as much wood in the bass as I could, so I put a stack knob here to kind of keep also the look of the classic two knob deal here. So if I turn off the bridge pickup and I just have this, then this is more of a classic kind of precision bass. Now I think of it as a little tubier, tubbier sound than with both pickups on, is a little fuller maybe. Whereas when you turn just the front pickup off, or sorry, the back pickup off. Okay, so there you go. You get this like classic P-bass sound, that like good old-fashioned rock and roll, nice bright sound. Like I said, I can use a pick. I can get it to be nice and rocky if I want. I don't have a pick handy at the moment, but right, so it can get real nice and clangy if I want it. Okay, so that's just this pickup. If I want to put just the back pickup on here, the bridge pickup, I get more of a, well, Jaco Pastorius was the king of this sound. It's got that, it's a little thinner, it's a little more nasally. And you can blend them however you like. I usually use all on or all off, depending on the, it's all of this, all of this, all of both. I don't usually blend them too much. Okay, so there's some other tricks here on this bass. The first trick being this device here, okay? This is called the bass mute. Now, I've talked about it before, but now we can actually hear the sound. And actually, that leads me to this, too. This is a replacement bridge. It's called a Badass Bass Bridge. It says right there, Badass Bass 2. These were standard bridges in the 70s designed to add more sustain, add a little more weight. And I had one for my jazz bass that I had slapped on there, and I liked it a lot. Now, this adds a ridiculous amount of sustain. I'm just going to pluck a note and let it ring out here, and we're going to see how long it rings. I mean, not bad. You're not going to hear it now at this point at a live gig with all the hubbub, but adds quite a bit of sustain. The reason that I got this is called the bass mute, and what it does is these little foam pieces here will rest up against the string when I move this lever, and they'll stop the string from ringing. The original Fender Precision basses had a cover that went on the bass here, and inside the cover it had a piece of foam. And then on later basses, they actually had individual ones per string for the jazz basses later. The original thought was that it was to emulate the sound of a double bass, because that's what was being played most of the time. So it would get this sort of deader, thumpier sound. So when I engage the bass mute here, it has a few different settings, but I'll put it on the full way. Instead of getting the nice full sustaining bass sound, you get this. Okay, and hear how it dies away a lot faster? You have more attack on the note, and then it drops off. Okay, so you get the kind of a... Okay, you get that really thump... So it immediately tightens up the bass, becomes thumpier, and you'll see it also takes away a lot of the high end. So already I've made this less bitey just by flipping on the mutes. Now, the second knob here that we haven't played with, we've messed with these. This is the volumes of the various pickups, how loud they are. This is the tone control. Okay, what it does is it removes high end. It's an analog circuit. When you roll back, it just takes away some of the high end. So I can actually roll this back down here with the mutes engaged and make it even bassier and like... I can immediately get more of that sort of classic 50s Motown-y, Memphis, Muscle Shoals, Stax, you know, Booker T and the MGs, all those kind of old school bass players used that muted tone. Okay, let's be honest. It's not exactly that tone. For all you bass player nerds out there, I know it's not exactly that tone. I'm not using flat wound strings, you know, using an old pickup. I understand that you're making concessions here. My opinion, though, is that when I'm out either in the studio or on the gig, this is approximate enough that with cymbals going and a singer singing and guitars playing and keyboards blaring and all sorts of stuff, you're not going to hear the subtleties you would that if you were in a room with this bass and then like a vintage Precision bass. So for me, this is close enough, and I'm good with that. This gets me way into the ballpark of any of these tones. It's not exact, but it's by far close enough that on the gig, you can't tell the difference. I can't tell the difference enough for it to make a difference. So that's the bass mutes in a nutshell. Now, it has a middle setting here where the mutes are gently touching the strings, but they're not really pressing against it. It's kind of nice because it helps keep the strings from ringing out if I'm playing something a little more complicated. It also gives me a kind of an in-between. So here, let's turn the tone all the way up. Let's turn them all the way off. So you get... That's no mutes. Here's the halfway mute. Okay, and then here's the mutes fully on. And you can, when you get one of these, you can set them up to be different. You can even flip it this further, and it presses them even harder, but I find that presses the strings out of tune. Too much for my ears. Alright, so that's the bass mutes. That's a little bit of the tone knob. These pickups, so I had mentioned early on that I replaced these pickups. These are Wild pickups, W-I-L-D-E, and they were designed by a guy by the name of Bill Lawrence. I was looking for replacement pickups, and I really didn't feel like dropping a ton of money on an actual, like, made in 1962 pickup, like an old... pulled from a bass. And I didn't really want to go with the Fender replacement. I just was looking for something else. But I wanted something with some pedigree, meaning I wanted something that was Fender-ish. And I found this guy, and his name is Bill Lawrence, and he worked for both Fender and Gibson, and he designed pickups for both companies. And these are his design. And I thought, okay, that's enough Fender pedigree for he worked for the company, so he understands what they do. And he designed these, and they're a little bit different than a standard Precision pickup. They have more pole pieces, these little dots here in the center. Usually there's 2 per string or 1 per string, and this, he has like an odd number. His idea is that this creates a more even magnetic pattern so that the sound from string to string is more even. Okay, and then I added this pickup. We actually, I had somebody cut into the bass, and I put this pickup in. This is a humbucker also. This is actually what they call stacked coils. So you've got 2 coils so that you don't get the hum, but they're one on top of each other. And yeah, I just dig it. It sounds good. It works for me. Now, here's one last big trick in this bass that really makes it work. On the back side here, on the back side of the headstock, here, I'll do this on this camera first. There's this tool, okay, and then down here on this camera, it's this. Okay, this is called the hip shot bass extender key, or it's also called a D tuner, all right? It's the little lever, and what it does is when you flip it, you can see it actually moves the entire tuning mechanism. This has got a double stop lever, so there's like a little screw here, and there's this screw here. When you flick it the first way, it stops against this extra screw where, I don't know where it is. I can't see it. Oh, it's in the back there. So it stops against this extra screw for the first stop, and then when you let it go all the way, it stops against this one. And since they're screws, you can actually tune them, and I can tune the 2 different notes that it goes to. I have it set to go from an E, which is standard tuning, to a D, which is a whole step below that, all the way down to a C. So I can, you know, get all my standard tuning stuff. I can go down, oops, one stop, and I can get a lot, like Rage Against the Machine. Okay. Then I can go all the way down to C, which is something that Will Lee from The Tonight Show, or he used to play bass for the David Letterman band, the CBS Orchestra. He's a studio guy in New York City. He goes all the way down to C, and he does a cover of Can't Get Next to You by Al Green. There's a record called Live at Manny's Car Wash, and it's Hiram Bullock on guitar, and Clint DeGannon on drums, and Will Lee on bass. And anyway, they do this cover, and he goes all the way down to C with this slap part. And I remember hearing that in college and just thinking that was the most awesome thing I'd ever heard. Right? But the problem is that it was the only song I ever knew that had a low C. So I didn't want to just tune my detuner that only had one position. So then they invented the one with two positions, and now I can go all the way down. So anyway, what's cool about that is that I can approximate the range of a 5-string bass with this 4-string bass. 5-string bass goes all the way down to a low B, which is only 1/2 step below where I set this. I come across a situation where I need that low B so rarely that I don't need to have a 5-string in my arsenal. I can get those low notes with this bass, and I'm much more comfortable doing it. I can get the extra low notes. I can mute with the mutes. I can, you know, change the brightness of the strings with the tone knob. So I can get all sorts of, you know, tones with this bass that range from super... bright with both pickups on to I'm going to go just P bass pickup, back off on the tone, roll up the mutes, and go. And you would almost not think it's the same instrument. That's this bass. Now I have one other bass, and the reason I have a second instrument is because this can't quite do everything. This is sort of all-purpose, but overall this bass is really, really punchy. It really makes itself known in the mix. It's not necessarily wide and fat. It really punches through, and the low mids. So I have a second bass, and if you'll excuse me for a moment, I'll be right back. So this is my other bass, and I had this one, I think, in the live stream that I did. This bass is a short scale bass, which means the distance between the end of the bridge here and the nut here is actually shorter than the other bass, this way. So this is a little more comfortable for me to play. It's a little easier to play. All the frets are a little closer together, but it has a different sound. Now the reason that I have a second bass is that this is the bass that I have for the things that I need to be really big and boomy. You can hear that this has a much fatter, wider... I had to put the pad on because this is a much hotter output, this pickup. But I have really old strings on here that are really dead. So what happens with bass strings is that, you know, all the dirt and the sweat and all the stuff on your hands gets in between the windings on these big strings. And it makes the string heavier. And so it doesn't vibrate for as fast or as long, right? Or as well. So the tone tends to die out a little bit. It tends to not be as bright sounding. So I have really old strings on here. These are strings that were actually taken from the blue bass you just saw. Before I got the pickup done and all that work done, I took those strings off and I put them on here when I got this bass, and I've never changed the strings on this bass because I just love that old string, big fat dead sound. So this is my like country bass. This is the bass that I use for like a lot of funk, like old school R&B kind of funk that I don't want to like play slap bass or something on. So yeah, this is a little more, I don't ever change this bass. I have no intention on modifying this bass at all. So this just sort of is the other side of things. It's a short scale, which that bass is not. It has this big fat humbucker in it, which that bass does not. This bass only really has one sound. It only really does one thing, and that's this big fat thing. So sometimes it's easier to just grab this. You know, if I'm going to go play a country gig, I don't need all the bells and whistles of the other bass. I don't need all the different tones. I just need this. So it's nice to have both sides. Have just the one tone machine that's all it does. I go to the rock and roll gig and this is all we play. Or I grab the other one and then I can play jazz and I can play funk and I can play this and that, and I can kind of get the tones to change, the timbre of the bass to change per song too, which makes it more pleasing for me to play. So I hope you enjoyed the tour of the whys of these basses and some of the tones that I can get. Just for the record, I'm going through my Gensler Magellan MG800 bass head over here that's down off camera. And I'm also running through a Sadowski preamp pedal, but none of that is engaged. There's a little bit of low mids and a little bit of lows from the bass amp, but that's it. I EQ'd it a little bit for my pleasing because, you know, it's my home studio and I want to listen to it the way I want to listen to it. Other than that, I don't have any processing going on. It's running through the iPad, but I don't have any processing going on. It's just the direct sound. The Sadowski preamp is not engaged, so I have it in line, but only just so that I can kick it on when I want to. So right now, all you're hearing is a little bit of EQ from the amp, but that's it, straight out of the back of that. And both of these basses sound pretty good on their own. And then I also have, like I said, I have the Sadowski preamp pedal. What that adds is, and I'll throw a picture of it up in here so you can see what I'm talking about. That I use mainly with the other bass. If I want a more modern sound, if I want a really nice slap bass sound, that scooped sort of slap bass sound that's real common, I can use that and get even a different tone with that preamp pedal, like an active bass that has a preamp built into the bass itself. I can emulate that again without having to pick up another instrument. So again, it adds another tonal variety for me. I can show up at a studio with these two basses and a couple of direct boxes, maybe an amp head, have three things with me, and I can get a world of different bass tones depending on whatever the engineer wants, and then I don't have to worry about it, and they're happy and I'm happy and I can get paid and life's good. So thank you for joining me on this tour through my basses again. I hope you like this setup. We're going to be doing more weird things like this. Hey, check out the Patreon page. There's not a whole lot up there right now because I've only got a couple of Patreons. Thank you guys so much. I love you, Alessandro and John, keeping it real there. Thanks for the support, guys. But yeah, check out the Patreon page. I'll put a link down below. Thanks to everybody on the Audio Bus forum for continuing to humor me after all this time. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. All you people out there that dig iOS music and my crazy personality, let's do it. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next time.